The gate stood tall. Avoid entity may be allowed. Point understand interest. Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. Use entity. The iron sign read a phrase that promised something it could never give. Work sets you free. But inside Auschwitz-Birkenau, freedom did not exist. Only survival. And for many, not even that. The train arrives before dawn. No announcements. No explanation. Just the sound of metal grinding against metal, and the silence of people who already feel something is wrong. Inside the cattle cars, there is no space to sit. No water. No air. Families stand pressed together, unable to move, unable to escape the smell, the fear, the waiting. Some have been inside for days. Some don't know where they are. But they all know one thing. Whatever is waiting outside will not be good. The doors slide open. Light floods in. Voices shout in a language many don't understand. Orders. Commands. Urgency. Men in uniforms, members of the SS, stand waiting. Their movements are fast, efficient, practiced. Because this is not new. This has been done before. Thousands of times. People are pulled from the train. Separated instantly. Men to one side. Women and children to another. There is no time to speak. No time to say goodbye. Hands reach out, but are forced apart. And in that moment, families are broken. Often forever. At the front of the line stands a man. A doctor. He does not ask questions. He does not examine anyone. He simply looks. And then, he points. Left. Right. Left. Right. A movement of the hand. That decides life or death. Those sent to the right will be registered, numbered, forced into labor. They will enter the camp. They will see what lies inside. Those sent to the left will not. They are told they are going to take a shower, to be cleaned, to rest, to prepare for work. But the people who have been here longer, they know the truth. The buildings stand quiet, simple, almost ordinary. From the outside, they do not look like places of death. But inside, the reality is something else entirely. These are the death blocks, the places where suffering was hidden, where lives ended without records, without names, without voices. One of the most feared places in the camp was Block 11. Prisoners called it the death block. Inside Block 11, punishment was not just about control. It was about breaking people completely. The cells were small, cold, but some were worse than others. There were standing cells, rooms so small that 4 prisoners were forced inside at once. No space to sit, no space to lie down, only to stand. All night, all day, sometimes for days at a time. There were starvation cells. Once inside, there was no food, no water, just darkness, and time. Time to weaken, time to fade, time to die. And then, there was the wall, the execution wall. Every day, prisoners were brought here, lined up, facing the bricks. Shots echoed through the courtyard. Again, and again, and again. No trial, no defense, no record, only silence. Block 11 was not just a prison. It was a place designed to erase people. But it was not the only place where death waited. Beyond the main camp stood larger buildings, facilities designed not for punishment, but for mass killing. Prisoners were told to undress, to leave their belongings neatly behind. They were told they would get them back, that everything would be returned. Many believed it, because the alternative was too impossible to accept. The doors closed, tightly sealed, and then something was released. Within minutes, the room filled with panic, confusion, desperation. People tried to reach the doors, tried to breathe, tried to survive. But there was no escape. Outside, guards waited, timing everything, listening. until the noise stopped. Then, the doors were opened, and the process continued. Again, and again, and again. This was not chaos. This was not random. This was a system. Organized, efficient, industrial. Under the regime of Nazi Germany, camps like Auschwitz became part of something far larger. A plan, a policy, a deliberate attempt to remove entire groups of people from existence. Millions were affected. Men, women, children, people who had done nothing wrong, except exist. Inside the camp, time lost meaning. Days blurred together. Survival became the only goal. Food was scarce. Work was endless. Disease spread quickly. And hope became something dangerous. Because hope meant believing in tomorrow. And tomorrow was never guaranteed. Some prisoners tried to hold on to something. A memory. A name. A face. Something to remind them they were still human. Others simply tried to endure one more hour. What made these places so horrifying was not just the suffering. It was how normal everything became. The guards followed routines. Schedules were kept. Records were written. As if this was just another job. Another day. And that is what made it so dangerous. Because when cruelty becomes routine, it no longer feels like cruelty. It becomes normal. There were moments of resistance. Small acts. Hidden acts. A piece of bread shared. A warning whispered. A hand held in the dark. Tiny acts of humanity. In a place designed to destroy it. Some tried to escape. Most failed. Some survived. But survival did not mean freedom. Because even after leaving, the memories remained. The sounds. The faces. The loss. Things that could never be forgotten. When the camp was finally liberated, what was discovered shocked the world. Not just the scale, but the system, the organization, the intention. Because this was not an accident. It was not a mistake. It was planned. And that is what makes it so important to remember. Today, places like Auschwitz still stand. Not as symbols of power, but as reminders. Reminders of what can happen when hatred is allowed to grow. When people are dehumanized. When silence replaces resistance. History is not just about the past. It is about understanding how those events were possible, so they are never repeated. Because the most dangerous thing is forgetting. If you want more powerful, untold history stories like this, subscribe. Because some parts of history were hidden, and some were almost erased. But they should never be forgotten. Even after the gates were opened, even after the guards had fled, silence did not leave the camp. It remained, heavy, unmoving, as if the ground itself remembered everything that had happened there. When soldiers first entered Auschwitz-Birkenau, they were not prepared for what they would see. They had heard rumors, stories of camps, of prisoners, of harsh conditions. But nothing matched the reality. They found people who were barely alive, walking, but not really living, bodies reduced to shadows, eyes that no longer showed fear, because fear requires strength, and many no longer had any left. Some prisoners did not react at all. They did not run. They did not celebrate. They simply watched, as if they no longer believed anything could change. Because for so long, hope had only led to disappointment. Promises had meant nothing. And survival had been measured in hours, not years. The soldiers tried to help. They brought food, water, medical aid. But even help had to be careful, because bodies that had been starved for so long could not suddenly return to normal. Too much food too quickly could be dangerous, even deadly. So recovery began slowly, step by step, meal by meal, day by day. And as the camp was explored, the scale of what had happened began to reveal itself. Rooms filled with belongings. Shoes, clothes, suitcases. Each one belonging to someone. Each one representing a life that had been interrupted. Names written on fabric. Addresses painted on bags. People who believed they would return. Who believed this was temporary. But it wasn't. There were also documents, records, lists, numbers, evidence of a system that had tracked people, not as individuals, but as entries, as data, as something to be processed. And then, there were the buildings themselves, structures designed not for shelter, but for destruction. The realization was slow, but undeniable. This had not been hidden because it was small. It had been hidden because it was too large to comprehend. When the world finally saw the truth, changed everything. People asked questions. How could this happen? How could so many people be involved? How could it continue for so long, without being stopped? And the answers were uncomfortable, because it was not just one person, not just one decision. It was a system, built step by step, allowed to grow, ignored by some, supported by others. It showed how quickly humanity can be lost, when people stop seeing others as human. After the war, trials began. Those responsible were brought before courts. Some denied everything. Some claimed they were following orders. Some said they had no choice. But the evidence remained. And the world had to decide what justice looked like. Yet even with trials, and verdicts, and punishments, there was something that could never be restored. The lives, the families, the futures, that had been taken. And for the survivors, the end of the camp was not the end of the story. Because survival came with its own burden. Memory, remembering what had been seen, what had been lost, what could never be brought back. Many chose to speak, to share their stories, so the world would know, so it would not be denied. Others remained silent, carrying everything inside, because some experiences are too heavy for words. Today, the site still stands, not as it once was, but enough remains. Enough to understand, enough to remember. Visitors walk through the same paths, see the same buildings, stand in the same spaces, and for a moment, they feel it, not fully, not completely, but enough to know that something important happened here, something that must never be forgotten. Because history is not just about what happened, it is about what we learn from it, and what we choose to do next. Because the danger is not only in the past, it is in forgetting the past, and allowing the same ideas, the same hatred, the same silence, to return. That is why these places remain. That is why these stories are told. Not to shock, not to disturb, but to remind. Because remembering is the first step in making sure it never happens again. If you want to continue learning about the hidden sides of history, make sure you subscribe. Because some stories are difficult to hear, but they are too important to ignore.